All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Designing the Best You. And today we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Selvi. She guides women to soothe their Crohn's conditions and regain their life naturally, realizing that the answers to healing herself took more than what her medical doctors or her own personal medical training could offer. She successfully explored alternatives to get to remission and remain. This is the huge part, guys. Remain in remission for 10 years. Her passion lies in applying her methods and other methods she's learned along the way to help her clients regain their life from the pain and the exhaustion of Crohn's. I know this. I've had friends who've had them, and it is completely exhausting. She lives in New York and, free from the grip of Crohn's, loves nothing more than to dance, travel, and explore in her free time. Welcome, Dr. Selvi.
Thanks so much for having me, Vennessa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Well, tell us a little bit about your journey. I mean, Crohn's. First of all, let's explain to people what Crohn's is, because they typically get that confused with IBS and IBD and all those type of things. Explain a little bit what it is and your journey with it.
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question. And you're right, there is a lot of misinformation, confusion, all of that. So, Crohn's disease falls under what's called IBD. So, the umbrella of IBD, which is irritable bowel disease. And it's an autoimmune disease and it is inflammatory. So, basically, you can have inflammation anywhere from your mouth all the way through the GI tract, all the way down to your bottom. And typically it's not continuous. So you might have it in one area and then you might have healthy areas and then you might have it again. Some people have it only isolated in one area. Some people have it all over in different areas. So you get symptoms depending. Lack of energy is a big one. That's usually the first one. The inflammation, depending on where it is, you might have heartburn, you might have pain in your abdomen, you might have diarrhea, bleeding in the stool, mucus. I mean, very glamorous disease, let me tell you.
Absolutely. Please share more.
Yeah. Welcome to my life.
Well, I'm sure many of our guests that are listening experience those, and they're like, wow, that's what a sense of relief. Someone's actually talking about it.
Exactly. And, I do tend to make light of it because I've literally been there. And so it's just like, I'm like, my thing to people is like, if we can't joke about this kind of stuff, like, really, who can? Like, when a client talks to me about, like passing gas and like being able to clear out a room, I'm like, yep, I totally feel you. Been there, done that.
Hey, y'all should just come to my house with boys. Don't even have to worry about having any condition.
Exactly. So, but yeah, all kidding aside, I mean, the inflammatory effects can run all throughout the body as well. So you can have things like rheumatoid arthritis type symptoms, inflammation in the eyes, skin rashes, food intolerances. So all sorts of things can start to present from what starts out in the gut. Which is basically, in my experience, is the root of all disease, is the gut itself, right? So we talk about leaky gut, we talk about addressing the inflammation that's in the gut, because once that starts to get addressed and the gut starts to heal, everything else starts to balance. So I talk about healing from the inside out, going down to the root. Um, and so the nice thing, or the beneficial thing, I suppose, in a disease like Crohn's disease, is that the problem is in the gut, right? As opposed to talking to someone else where maybe they're not having so much with their GI symptoms, it's a little bit different. But if I'm talking to someone and they're literally in pain, they're having bloating, they're having diarrhea, they're much more willing and able to go and address those gut issues head on, right? So some of the work that we do is not always pleasant. It's deep, it's involved, it's all of that. But when you have that much distress, is just like, I know how that felt, and I was like, I would do anything to get out of this. So
Yeah,
that's
and that's important. It's like a lot of people, it's the question I ask people, do you want to continue being in that pain? And do you want to be in
mhm.
the same spots next month or next year? Or do you want to put in a little bit of the hard work, maybe a lot of the hard work, and take care of the issue for, like, you've been in remission for 10 years. Tell us a little bit about, like, how did you figure out you had Crohn's disease? I mean, obviously you're medically trained, but like, how did you figure that out? What did it feel like? What did you experience?
Sure. And so this will probably make the listeners feel a lot better. I didn't figure it out for a heck of a long time, and I speak with folks where it takes years and years and years to even get a diagnosis. So looking back, I actually had symptoms all the way to childhood. Like, I had ulcers in my mouth, I was tired, I had a sensitive stomach, quote unquote, is what I was told. stomach viruses, and it was just bouts of diarrhea and tiredness, and then I would be better, and then I'd have vomiting. And so looking back, I'm pretty sure it stemmed all the way back to childhood, but it took getting all the way to college when I was having diarrhea that wouldn't stop despite taking Imodium over the counter stuff. And we're just like, something is off. Why isn't it stopping? And one of our family friends, who's a doctor, cardiologist, actually, bless his heart, decided to investigate a little bit further, and he actually drew blood work. And then the blood work showed that I had inflammation, so my sedimentation rate was really high at that point in time. So he said, okay, it looks like something's going on. Let's do an upper GI study, basically where I swallowed barium, and look at what the GI tract looked like. And that showed inflammation at the end of my small intestine. Then he referred me to a GI doctor who did a colonoscopy, took a biopsy, and then that led to the diagnosis. So it took a long time and a lot of distress to actually get there. And I was like, okay, now I have a diagnosis. But that was kind of like the beginning of the confusion in a way. It was like, it felt great to be validated, to be like, okay, it's not in my head. But now what the heck does this mean? Where do I go from here? Like, what is this? I'd never heard of it before. Right.
And
So,
that's where a lot of people are at just with any of their conditions. Like, okay, I've been struggling. I've had all these symptoms. A doctor finally figures something out and gives you a name to it. And you're like, okay,
yeah.
now, like you said, I mean, even when I was diagnosed with mine, I'm like, well, okay, cool. There's a name. Now what do I do? And a lot of times the doctors don't always know what to do. They're just like, oh, okay. I mean, y'all who are like starting off in this journey, you have Google now that you can help a lot and a lot of health coaches and things like that out there. Back
Yeah.
when like I was diagnosed, didn't have that.
Same.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the process that you went through, like mentally, of like, okay, I'm diagnosed, now what?
Mm-hmm. So I actually, looking back, I think it was kind of smart. I took a semester off from school just to digest everything that was happening, because I struggled with it. And I was just like, well, what does this mean? I was told, okay, now you need to be on medication for the rest of your life. Like, this is not going to go away. We don't know what's going to happen, this and that. And I was terrified. I was like, okay, now what do I do? And all I knew to do was listen to what my doctor said. So take the medication. Diet doesn't really play much of a role, maybe low residue. So don't eat a whole lot of vegetables if you're in pain. And that was kind of it. And so I felt like I was like blindfolded in a forest trying to figure things out myself. Well, not really figuring things out at that point. I think I was just like being stubborn. And I was like, well, I still want to eat my fried food. I still want to eat fast food and this and that. I don't care. And went through this whole rebellion phase, which did not turn out very
I
well.
think we've all been there who have been diagnosed for a while. I did too. I'm like, I'm healthy. There's no way. I don't need medication. Hospital, how many times later? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it literally took that. It took, me winding up. I laugh now, but at the time it was not so funny. It took me literally winding up in the hospital, needing emergency surgery, waking up to an ostomy that I did not know was going to happen, to say, okay. And it still didn't stop me completely, mind you, right? So came near death, was told I had 24 to 48 hours to live. They told my parents, not me at the time, and woke up to two bags, two drains coming out of my abdomen, and was like, wow. So was just totally paralyzed. Later, a year later, they were able to reverse it. I was still being stubborn about food and, all of those things
I
because
think we do,
I,
because food it's an emotional thing, right?
so true.
It's a connection that we're just like, right, I mean, we're talking like right before 4th of July here, but it's like when these holidays come up, we're like,
Mhm.
oh, that really big, fat, juicy, fried, whatever, that
Yeah.
just so, and just one,
Yes.
sandwich or whatever, just one thing of fries or whatever it is. You're like, I'll deal with the pain. And what
Mhm.
people don't realize, and I'm sure you'll explain this too, is like just having that one time, even just a bite, that
Mhm.
lasts weeks, months
Yeah.
later in your system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is that. And for me, there was also a component of emotional eating. It was like, well, I feel so lousy anyway that what difference does it make? So I'm just going to eat whatever, fill in the blank, right? The pepperoni pizza or the McDonald's or the, like, totally trying to medicate myself with food. And my doctor said, like, food doesn't really play a role. So it must be okay. Like, that was my logic at the time.
I mean, medically trained professionals, I mean, I talk to them a lot all the time. It's like they have like one course maybe on nutrition.
Yep.
And it's funny that you said like, you're medicating yourself with food and people are like, food is medicine. Well, yeah, it can be an emotional medicine. And it can be the wrong food that is medicating you, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and didn't help that my mom is an amazing cook too, so, there were certain of her dishes that I was like, "But I don't wanna give that up because this, that, and the other thing," right? So it was a journey to get to a point where I was finally like, "I need to do something," and it really took me hitting rock bottom, and so, my point now is like, you don't have to hit rock bottom, like, you don't have to have end surgeries and get to a point where I knew all the nurses in the hospital, they knew me. It was just like, I was like, this is crazy. And I got to a point where finally I had another surgery and I had an open wound on my abdomen. So, and that wound did not have well, it had gauze pad on it, right? So no ostomy bag, and it was putting out stool every single day. And I lived with that for a year. And it took that for me to be like, I do not feel human anymore. I have no shred of dignity. This is not living. My body feels possessed. I need to do something. There has to be something I could do.
And you
Anything.
didn't want to go anywhere, hang out with people, hide in your room type thing.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hiding away from family, like missing out on friends' weddings and things because it's just like, oh my gosh, like I don't want anyone to be around me. This is horrible kind of thing. So yeah, and it took that, and I'm a very social person. For me to hide out in a room and not connect with my friends was just this was torture.
Mhm.
Adding on top of everything else, and I was running out of medication options. So I was at a point in my with my medications where I was at like 8 times the normal dose of medication. Yeah. And I was still having issues, and they were still like, we're not really sure what we're going to do. And I'm like, okay, now my back is literally against a wall.
Mhm.
I have to do something. I need to step up. And that's when I finally started to be proactive and started to make changes for myself.
So what type of changes did you end up making? A lot
Mhm.
of us think, okay, we'll remove some junk and we can have it here and there. But like what did you do and like what did that mental process look like too?
Sure. So it was basically, long story short, taking responsibility is really what it boiled down to, right? Taking personal responsibility for my health, for my body, for what was happening to me, as opposed to before where I was like, okay, my doctor wants to give me more medication. Sure, whatever. Another surgery. Sure, whatever, and not to make light of it, but that was literally my energy at the time and it felt horrible. As opposed to, okay, maybe there's something that I can do. What if like food is going through my system intuitively? It never made sense to me when my doctor was like, food doesn't play a role because I'm like, but it's literally going right down my GI tract, like going down my stomach, my esophagus, into my intestines where there's inflammation. How is there no connection? Like, this makes no sense. And so I started to look into it and I'm like, oh, there might actually be changes that I could make. So I started really small. I know gluten-free became a fad, but that was literally how I started, was like, okay, gluten-free. Giving up bread and pasta was like, oh my God, this is like death to me. This is going to be terrible.
I hear you. I have an Italian German family. It's like give up what?
Yeah,
No, that's a staple. But it is
exactly.
in a lot of cultures too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for me, like, I don't know, I joke that I was Italian in a past life because like ciabatta bread is like, oh my gosh, like
Oh, just with it in the oil and with the
totally.
cheese and oh,
Oh, yes.
I know. Anyways, we had to give that up. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay, but if I can feel better, if this actually makes a difference, maybe it's worth it. Of course, I slipped, and of course, I made mistakes along the way, but I started to notice that I felt better, and I was like, and then I plateaued, right? So then it's like, okay, maybe there's something else I can do. And I tried more dietary changes, and I learned over time what worked and what didn't work. And there's a huge correlation between what I was eating and not just my symptoms, but my actual inflammation in my body, right? Sometimes nowadays I'll hear either nutritionists or even doctors saying that there's a correlation between symptoms and what you eat, but it boils down to the actual inflammation, and how your gut functions is affected by what you eat, period. Now that's not the only answer, but it is the foundation of healing, is what I've found. And so, like I said, it took me a lot of trial and error, a lot of face planting to figure that out for myself. But there is so much that can be done, and it is highly individual. So yeah.
And that's the thing is there's all these like you mentioned like the gluten-free fad diet. It was a fad, and then
Sure.
people weren't realizing that in the gluten-free stuff there was other foods that were used to take one form of gluten out. And so it's really just like you said, it's individualized. It's trial and error. You can't just say you have to go keto, right? Or you got to do like vegan or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with any of those, but
Oh,
each person's body is different. Some people can do the full out AIP, the autoimmune protocol, and
mhm,
they're good. Other
mhm,
people are like, first of all, emotionally, I can't do that. It's hard, right? And
right,
then second of all, they're like, well, some foods still bother me. And
right,
now what do I do? Or if you go,
right.
like, I had done paleo a long time ago before, like after my first condition, because no one told me about food. And I was like, oh, well, paleo, that seems to make sense. Well, a lot of that's like almond flour and coconut and
Mhm,
come to find out almonds and eggs, right? Almonds
mhm,
and eggs were a massive issue for me. Massive.
mm,
I was like, why am I getting sick? Why am I so, like you said, it's very individualized. And until you start doing the trial and error, or there's food insensitivity and intolerance testings that you can do too. And by the way, guys, there's a big difference between them, right? One of them is going to be you're going to react right away within 48 hours type thing. Another one is it's going to take weeks and
mhm.
weeks until it finally reveals itself. And then you're like, what did I eat? What happens type thing.
Yes.
So it's very, very individualized. So, um, now that you have that and you've been in remission for 10 years, like, so I'm going to ask the question, do you still cheat? We'll call it. And how do you feel? If you do.
Well, I don't call it cheat anymore. And yeah, so the more I've healed, the more that I'm able to tolerate. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going around eating garbage every single day. No, because I respect my body much too much to do that. But if I am, like, say it's my birthday and I really want a piece of chocolate cake, am I going to have a small amount of the decadent chocolate ganache cake? You better believe it. Yeah. And will I relish every bite? Absolutely. And then I'm done. So yeah, I've learned to heal my relationship with food over time, right? Like I don't medicate with food, or I don't need to medicate with food anymore. Like I can have food for healing, but I can also enjoy food for pleasure too, just depending. And I know where that balance is. And that's where people tend to get tripped up, I found, right? Or like you said, like where the reaction happens weeks later and they're like, what the heck did I eat? And then people are like, this is too hard. There can't be a relation with food, so I'm just going to eat whatever I want. Like I hear that all the time.
Mhm. Oh, I do too. And it's like you have to think, and someone said this a long time ago that I had heard and it stuck with me. It's like, okay, you have a bag of potato chips. Do
Mhm,
you really have to eat the entire bag to feel good?
mhm.
Or is just like a handful of them going to be sufficient enough? And then you get to the point of like, do I even need the handful?
Right.
Right. So it's like you have to start thinking about why you're eating what you're eating. And I
Mhm.
mean, heck, I do this too. I was doing this last night. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm kind of hungry. And I was like, I think I want some ice cream. No, no. Am I really hungry? And do I
Mhm.
really need that? No, I'm just bored. Let's drink a glass of water and walk away. And that's
Yeah.
all it was. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's other days I do indulge. Right. It's just like you said, you'll have that piece. You just have to understand how your body's going to feel.
Mhm.
And I don't know about you, but I keep like a tracker and I encourage
Mhm.
my clients to like, here's this is what I ate, for the periods of time. This one bothered me. This one didn't.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
those type of things that kind of eliminate all of that, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, when I'm working with people, we go through things with a fine tooth comb, like you were saying. Like, people ask me about gluten-free products, and but there's so many things. There's fillers in there, and there's gums, and there's all sorts of things that can create reactions that people aren't even aware of, right? So, can I have this is a common question. Or I'm at the grocery store, can I buy this? And it would send me a picture of the label and let me help you figure this out, because there may be hidden things that you don't even realize is
Oh,
in
there's
there.
tiny, tiny things.
Tons.
I mean, we
Yeah.
found out through my son, the oldest
Mhm.
one, he has a potato intolerance. So first we thought it was gluten free. Okay, here
Mhm.
we go. And then we started doing gluten. He's still having problems. And then it was potato. And we're like, okay, then people don't think tapioca, y'all, is potato. So when you see tapioca, flour, or starch, that is still going to be a problem. And then we found out too, we're like, okay, we removed that stuff. We're like, he's still having issues.
Mhm.
Paprika, a
Yeah.
spice, a simple little spice. And we're like, okay, now we can't have those. But it takes that trial and error
Yes.
to understand where your body should be.
Exactly. And that takes dedication, it takes persistence, and it can be tough, especially if you're trying to figure it out on your own. For sure it can be tough. I know, like that's where I got frustrated. That's where people that I've spoken to also tend to just get frustrated. They're like, this is too complicated, because it is complicated. Like it's no joke. Yeah.
Well, and that's why we have people like yourself who are like, here, I'm going to help guide you through that. So walk us through, like, a client comes to you and they've got the, some kind of issues or symptoms, and they're, what do you do with them?
So, okay, well, if I were going to go into everything, we could be here all night. So I'll
No, we
scurry.
won't go through everything. We want people to go to you, but, like, what would be like the first, like, things that you guys would start going through?
Of course. So initially, it's, what's their goals, right? So what are they looking for? What are you looking to accomplish? How do you want your life to change? So one of the first things that I love to do is to give people permission to dream. And I find, like, with chronic illness, with Crohn's disease, with any autoimmune disease, people stop dreaming. They stop hoping because they're afraid to hope, right? What if things change? What if they don't change and I'm still back here or I'm worse? And so the first thing is, let's take all the blinders off. Anything is possible. What does that look like? Like, let's really go there. What does that look like? Okay, now what are your goals? What do you feel like are your realistic goals? And then I help them figure out how to get there. So, yes, we start with food, absolutely. And that is a big piece of the puzzle. But, people ask me all the time, so if I come to you, Dr. Selvi, are you just going to give me a diet plan and, like, send me out the door? And I'm like, oh gosh, no.
And too many people do that,
Yeah,
and it's, I don't know about you, but it makes me sick to my stomach because, like we said
totally.
earlier, it's individualized, and
Yes.
people don't feel like they're loved, we'll call it, because,
Yeah,
like, here, this is the paleo, or back with Atkins, right? Atkins plan, right? That everyone should follow, and then people wonder why they're not losing weight.
exactly, exactly. And so I make a joke about that too, right? When people are like, I've tried this diet, and I'm like, so you've tried the keto, so you've tried the paleo, so you've tried the AIP, the SCD, the ABCD. Like, I
Yep.
just am like,
All of them. All of them.
throw
And
all that out the
feel
window.
sick. Well, yeah,
Yes.
a bad diet,
Yeah.
and it's a marketing tool. Now, do they work? Yes, to a point. Some people they work really well with, and some people they don't,
Mhm.
and that's okay either way.
Yes. And so, yeah, so we start there for sure. But then there's a lot of stuff around mindset. And like you said, too, right? It's individualized. Like, when we're working together, like, I'm there with you in the trenches, right? Like, I'm like, I see you. I get it. Like, I've been there. If you're like, I'm feeling pain. Sometimes it's almost like joking around too, right? Like, I have this pain here, like, like I look like I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm like, oh yeah, I've been there. Like, I was at 8 months pregnant, like, so there's some of that too. And so people, I find that the trust is really beautiful because they understand that I've walked a mile in their shoes, and I take that really seriously because I know how bad it can be, but I also know how amazing it can be if you're willing to put in the time and do the work and, move through the process. It can be absolutely amazing. And so when I see people starting to move through and doing the things and seeing not just their bodies change, not just their health change, but their life starting to shift, it's beautiful. Like, I remember this, actually, right now I'm working with a woman who is amazing. Um, PhD, brilliant, brilliant woman, and, is just like so willing to feel things that she hasn't felt before, like willing to not just make the changes because she'd been making a lot of dietary changes, but the mindset shifts, right? The really going deep. And she's like, as deep as you want to go, as deep as I can go, take me there. And I'm like, okay, let's do this, sister. Let's do this. And so to see her starting to open up to possibilities, starting to see her like, how can I now shift my work life to get a better balance in my life? How can I, move this around and move that around? And see her starting to stand in her power and her truth is so rewarding. And that's my goal, like, for women to be like, this is not just about Crohn's. This is about you standing in your power. This is about you standing in your truth. And I have found, at least in most of the women, if not all of the women that I've spoken to, speaking their truth, using your voice, right? Owning who you are as a woman. That doesn't mean that you have to be like, oh, screw everyone. And, this, it's not about that. It's about who are you really at your core. And let's get in touch with that, because who you are at your core is pure wellness, is pure health, is pure love, period. And that is your birthright. And if that's not happening, there is some piece that's out of alignment: mind, body, soul, emotions. So let's start getting things back into alignment and watch the magic happen. Really. Like, that might sound a little bit out there, but it's like when you give the body half a chance and you give it the tools that it needs, it can heal. Period.
It's amazing, right? It is, and then, going back to, like, having someone who's been through it,
Mhm.
that's huge. I mean, how many of us have been to doctors and they're like, oh yeah, just do this and do that. And you're like, have you ever been there? Have you ever felt the way that
Yeah.
I'm feeling? Oh, I've had like one client or patient. You're like, well, but you have not been there. And I understand not everyone can be where we're at, but still to have someone like you who's been there and really understands, even just with any autoimmune condition. I'm sure you don't have just people with a Crohn's that
Right.
come to you, right? Just
Mhm.
like I don't have people who just have Addison's or Hashimoto's or anything like that come to me,
Right.
but we understand how they feel
Yes.
and what they're going through mentally and physically. And that makes all the difference in the world. And taking the time that I know you do to
Yes.
spend with them. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
know about you, but I rather spend 2 hours with a person and help them really just be in touch and figure out what's going on
Mhm.
than here. And to be
Totally.
do it for free too, sometimes, just because it's like, hey, because I want you to be better because women are so important in this world. Not saying that
Totally.
men aren't, but like we have just this power that
Mhm.
if you get a woman like healthy
Mhm.
physically and mentally, she
Mhm.
can move mountains.
Totally, totally, 100% agree with that. And to reflect a little bit back on what you were saying, like that was the main reason that I left medicine. I didn't feel like I was making a difference in anybody's life. I'm like, okay, I see you for like whatever, 10, 15 minutes. I need to talk to you, connect with you, examine you, give you a prescription, and send you out the door. I didn't feel like, and nothing was changing. And I'm like, what the heck am I doing? I came into medicine to help people, and I'm not helping anybody. And so now when I have like at least an hour for a session to really go deep in with someone and be like, what's going on, like what's going on in your life, and go through things with a fine-tooth comb, and in that hour plus, like just depending, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel held. It's such a beautiful exchange that happens, and I'm like, my God, like you said, like I get to do this. And yeah, sometimes it is for free, like sometimes that's just how it is because it feels so good. Absolutely. And
I
you're right
love
about
the
women
respect
too.
that. Mhm. I
When
love the
women
respect
heal,
that.
yeah.
Absolutely. So where, 'cause I don't want to give away all that you do for people. I want them to experience everything that you have to offer because you've just helped so many women over the years. Like, where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to find me is my website. It's www.drselvi.com. So it's drselvi.com. And they'll find a free downloadable Keys to Ease Crohn's starter kit there that you can download, which would be great first steps for anyone who's having any sort of gut issues whatsoever. So it's not just for Crohn's, anyone who's feeling off in their digestion, it'll be a great first step.
That's great. And then if you can leave our audience just with one tip that they can do like right now, like they're
Mhm.
like, oh, I don't even feel like we all do this, right? With autoimmune community, it's like, I don't want to go online or talk to anyone right now. Like, but what can they do right now to start like understanding their symptoms and start really healing themselves from the inside out?
Absolutely. I would say just to start noticing, right? Just to be curious. I think so many of us tend to get in a phase where we're judgmental of ourselves for different things, right? Why did I eat this? Or why did I do that? Or why didn't I do this? Or why didn't I do that? As opposed to, well, that's interesting. Oh, my stomach is hurt. I wonder what happened. I wonder why, as opposed to beating yourself up for eating this thing or for not doing this or that, right? Just to start becoming more curious allows you to start developing a relationship with your body. And that's where healing really starts, is to start developing and healing that relationship with the body, which is broken to begin with. And that relationship can absolutely be repaired and healed.
I love it. I'm 100% agree with you on that. 100%. So, well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Selvi, for being on our show and sharing all of your wealth of knowledge. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to make sure that you do go to our site. Everything will be in the show notes for you. And if you like this episode, please go ahead and share it with other people. Leave us a review. Go and tag us both on social media so that we see that you've watched, you've listened, wherever you're going to be listening and viewing this at. And again, just to make sure you guys are just working on designing the best you because the world needs you so incredibly desperately at your best. No one else's best, your best. All right, guys, until next time.